Ever wondered about underage drinking in Israel on Purim? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be discussing in this 173rd episode of The Jewish Drinking Show, bringing L'chaim to life. I'm your host, Rabbi Drew Kaplan, and I'm welcomed by first-time guest of the show, Dr. Eric Scheier. Welcome.
Hi, Drew. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Scheier, for those of our listeners, our viewers who are less or maybe not even familiar with you at all, what can you tell us?
I was born and raised in Rochester, New York, where we're shooting from.
Yeah.
I'm an alumnus of the Brighton High School,
Mhm.
and I'm a pediatric emergency physician in Kaplan Medical Center in Rehovot, Israel.
And you made an Aliyah in fall of 2008.
Correct.
Right. So you've had a number of years to be there, over a decade and a half.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the topic of today, which is, I guess, what you see in the emergency room or in other healthcare facilities in Israel when it comes to children, teenagers who've really just imbibed anything too much on Purim. So I don't know how you want to talk about it, but what have you seen?
So we've seen too many adolescents coming in drunk. Kids have easy access to alcohol. And it's not just in the pediatric emergency room. It's not just the kids. It's the late teens. It's the kids who were in yeshiva in 12th grade, and now they are enjoying their first year of freedom in Israel. And they go to Ben Yehuda and have access to alcohol that they wouldn't have access to in the United States. The drinking age in Israel is 18, I believe. And the drinking age in the United States is 21, I believe. And that gap is the basis of the problem.
Is it possible to have separate conversations about those Americans or other Anglos or people from abroad studying that gap year?
Yeah, it's not just the Anglos.
Yeah,
I mean, it's Israeli kids too. And is
that a separate phenomenon though, versus those who are Israelis versus those who are studying abroad for the year?
I think that it is exacerbated by the fact that there is this gap in age. Israelis grow up in Israel, where it's a problem, but it's not. You don't have this sudden freedom. Israelis, to begin with, have a life of responsibility. At 18, they go into the army, and at 21, they're out and in university. There's not this sudden shift to total freedom like you see with the American yeshiva kids. Little bit of statistics.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there was an NIH study that showed that 3.2% of all alcohol that is consumed in the United States is consumed by teens aged 12 to 20. And 90%
in America.
So that's in the United States. 90% of that consumption is binge drinking. In Israel, about 15%, there was a 2016 survey that showed that about 15% of Israeli teens, 15 years old, had been drunk on more than 2 occasions in the previous month. And among the American yeshiva students, about 11% had more than 5 drinks in a sitting in the previous month. And five drinks in a sitting in an adolescent has much more of an effect than it would on you or I. We develop
both physically, but also mentally as well.
Physically, but mentally as well. The adolescent brain continues to develop into the early 20s, and alcohol affects that development. The adolescent body tends to be smaller than ours and less tolerant of alcohol, and that is particularly true among girls. Girls just metabolize alcohol more slowly than boys. And what all of this means is that drinking, which in adolescence translates to binge drinking, too frequently leads to badness, leads to bad decisions, to potentially scarring events, to blackouts, to just to things that adolescents aren't ready for.
I hadn't thought to ask you about the gender divide. What do you see, both in terms of the gap year students as well as even just general Israeli teenagers? So those are 2 different segments, but I'm curious about the gender difference.
So the gap year students are, for the most part, in Jerusalem, and I practice in Kaplan and Rehovot. So our population is, like the rest of the country, is Israeli. And we see kids who are brought in blacked out. And if they're lucky, they're brought in by their friends. And they can be some are found blacked out on park benches and brought in by EMS personnel or by a bystander calls it in. And these kids have sky high levels of alcohol, life-threatening levels of alcohol. Alcohol slows all of your systems, and so it slows your heart rate, it lowers your blood pressure, it can it lowers your body temperature, it lowers your blood sugar, which can be life-threatening, and it also can produce coma. And if an adolescent has enough alcohol in their system and they're blacked out and then they vomit, their airway can be threatened. They can aspirate that vomit. They're so obtunded that they can aspirate their vomit, and so they're brought into the emergency room for resuscitation and for monitoring. What all of this means is that drinking in adolescence is much more likely to produce a life-threatening situation than drinking in adults.
Have there been any particular instances or cases that have really stuck out to you in your experience?
I mean,
that you can share?
There are too many cases that are similar where an adolescent earlier in mid-teens is brought in by friends, completely obtunded, unresponsive. We've had children who come in with low temperatures who need to be warmed up. We've had children who come in with low blood sugars who need to be resuscitated. And
resuscitated?
Fluid resuscitation. They need to have sugar added to their fluids. Then there's the social aspect. How do they get to this point? And that requires intervention as well, which makes the stay in the emergency room sometimes into a hospitalization. It's not just about resuscitating them physically. It's about finding out how they got to be in such a life-threatening situation.
Wow. Hey there, it's Adar. This is a Purim episode. If you want to find out more Purim episodes or just simply other resources about Purim, feel free to check out jewishdrinking.com/Purim. Again, jewishdrinking.com/Purim for resources, articles, essays, clips, and so much more, all about Purim. Thank you. Now back into the episode. I just realized, even though our focus is on Purim and what you've seen, it is fair to say it's a noticeable spike versus year-round. I do want to go on a tangent. Are there other times that you may see smaller spikes? I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, Purim is a spike.
It's any time the kids have nothing to do.
Oh, really?
It's summer. Yeah, summer's a big problem.
Just nothing to do is the reason?
Yeah.
Wow.
They'll go out at night and drink when they have nothing the following day.
These are we're just talking about teenagers in general?
Right. I see up until 18. So the American yeshiva phenomenon is an 18 to 20-year-old phenomenon, that sudden burst of freedom. But we see it just across the board in Israel, in all demographics. It's not necessarily secular or religious. It's in all demographics. We see it in the teens. Anytime they have a Friday night or Saturday night of freedom just to go out, there too frequently is alcohol involved. So we'll see. Purim is a big spike.
Probably the biggest, I assume.
You're right. Right. Purim, Independence Day, the whole summer.
Yom HaAtzmaut,
Yom HaAtzmaut, the whole summer.
I never thought about the whole summer.
The end of the holiday period, where you have the end of Passover, and they're just getting it all out before they have to go back to routine, or the end of Sukkot, and just before they go back to routine. Then we do see spikes.
The summer thing, is that just sort of weekends in the summer?
Well, it also has to do with the fact that in Israel it's hot during the day. So most social activity happens in the evening and with the teens into the night.
Yeah.
And so they're frequently up until 3 or 4 in the morning, just hanging out. And there can be alcohol involved. It's witching hour, 3 or 4 in the morning. They are drinking and drinking and drinking to the point where they black out. And then hopefully someone brings them into the emergency room. They can black out and be injured. They can fall and injure themselves. They can be injured by others or abused during the process of being blacked out.
Yeah.
And they don't realize just how quickly they can get to this point, and they don't realize that they can get to that point with relatively light alcohol as well. It's not just the kids. I mean, there are the kids who bring a bottle of vodka to their friend's house. We actually had how old was this kid? He was 9 or 10 years old, and he found his parents' vodka, and he had it in the morning. Oof. And his sister noticed him kind of stumbling out of the house on the way to school. And then in school, he just became, nobody could understand why he was so loopy. And so they called EMS, and en route EMS, he just blacked out. And it took a while for us to realize, when we see a child in the emergency room, we have to think to send an alcohol level. And even when you send the alcohol level, if there's no story that they've been drinking, it takes an hour or two for the level to come back. And so it wasn't immediately that we recognized that this kid was drunk. So it's not, it can happen at any age, any time that there's access to alcohol, which is why I'm very much in favor of increasing the age of the legal age of drinking to 21 in Israel.
Oh, interesting.
Nobody under 21 needs to be buying alcohol.
I never thought about this, just because I just assumed it's sort. I'm not saying literally set in stone, but are there I have not been reading about this. Are there any movements to change that? Or is it mostly in small
there were some
medical community
murmurings? Nothing.
There's no big
nothing
push.
Organized. There's no big push. No. Because the problem spikes. It spikes and then it goes away for a little bit, and then it spikes again and it goes away for a little bit. It's something that's kind of been smoldering for years.
Hey there, I wanted to break in. I hope you're enjoying this episode so far with Dr. Eric Scheier. I wanted to give you a sneak peek into our next episode on shul kiddushes. Here we go.
The cocktail party connection is the key to understanding the modern Kiddush format.
I hope you enjoy that sneak peek on shul kiddushes. That episode will be coming out after Passover. That's right, you heard me correctly, after Passover. The Jewish Drinking Show will be taking a Purim and Passover break, and we'll resume after Passover. Until then, wishing you a very joyous Purim, and also hopefully a very meaningful and enjoyable Passover. Until then, I hope you enjoy your holidays, and now back into this episode featuring Dr. Scheier. So speaking of spiking, so going back to the Purim being a huge spike, and I guess over like you mentioned, the end of the holiday seasons, maybe weekends, especially in the summer, more teenagers. But Purim, I imagine also, you mentioned this kid that you didn't even think to check for blood alcohol level. But for Purim, I imagine you probably see a range of kids, not unique to not exclusively teenagers, right?
Well,
or what do you see? What do you see in Purim?
It's really the teens.
You don't see any 10 to 12-year-olds so much?
That is extraordinarily rare. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I can't remember seeing a child that young who came in with Purim related drunkenness. It's mostly the kids who are able to go out on their own. So once they get in, even the early teens, 12, 13 years old, once they're out on their own, they can have easy access to alcohol. And carding in the United States is much more frequent than it is here. I got carded the other day when we were out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we're carded in upstate New York. Yeah.
No hair on my head, and I got carded. So I was very, very impressed with the diligence in the United States. We need to be doing more of that.
But carding is not real. I mean, I know I've been to Israel and I bought alcohol on many occasions. I remember one of the first times I ever did so, I must have been 19. So, and okay, fine. I was of age, no big deal. I was in Tel Aviv buying liquor. The wild thing to me was also in the store at the same time was a kid no older than 14 or 15. Not the owner didn't even bat an eyelash and sold him the bottle of vodka or whatever. Blew me away. I'm like, okay, you're not going to ID for me. Like, fine, but this kid.
If the kid's got to get up on his tippy toes to hand his credit card over to, then there might be eyebrows raised. But any teen can walk in and buy anything.
Really? That's pretty common.
It's too common.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously there are probably some
Yeah.
stores, some places that are going to care more than others, carding wise, but many sounds like that's just generally not the culture.
Right.
It sounds like there's probably also not the.
They're getting it from their older siblings. They're getting it from somewhere.
But it also sounds like I mean, the government, like, they have to be incentivized to care.
Right.
So if there aren't government sort of watchdog agencies that will find them,
right. I don't
like
have
in
any
America,
real
there's
statistics on that,
people
but
care.
anecdotally, it could happen more.
So there's a greater ease of access.
There is definitely a greater ease of access. Part of that is the age. An 18-year-old, I would say that you reach a certain level of maturity, not just mentally. I just think that an 18-year-old, I think, is closer to a late teen than a 21-year-old. And so that's kind of the gray area when they all walk in together. And one of the friends happens to be 18 and then buys for everybody. I think you're much less likely to have that happen when the age is 21 and they are post-army, they're in real life, they've kind of seen, they've had their years of responsibility, and they're older and wiser.
Hello, dear listeners. It's your host, Rabbi Drew. I wanted to break in right now and just say, hey, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate, or watching, however you're consuming this content. And I'm always open for new ideas, both for specifically the Jewish Drinking Show, whether it's topics, whether it's guests. I'm also looking for other resources that I can provide you with in the Jewish Drinking Project more broadly. Also, I'd really like to offer you the opportunity to sponsor this work. Whether if you want to go to patreon.com/Jewish Drinking, I would greatly appreciate it. And if you have ideas for swag, also, please feel free to send them to me at drew@jewishdrinking.com. All right, thank you so much, L'chaim, and now back into the episode.
It's kind of par for the course on any Saturday shift you're going to have in the summer. There are the kid in the corner who is completely blacked out. You got to put an IV in, put them on monitoring, find out where the parents are, who is this kid, because he's not verbal, and then go from there.
So I guess it goes back to an earlier comment you made when these kids are brought in, best case scenario, their friends bring them in. So at least there's a context they know, and contacts. They know who to be in touch with, and they know. But it sounds like many times it's also not the case.
Yeah, I mean, so many times they're brought in just by EMS. Somebody calls it in as a kid who's passed out on a park bench, and then they're brought in. But in a lot of cases, they're brought in by their friends. A lot of time, they're brought in by their friends who they were all drinking in the house, and then somebody just had too much, and they get scared, and then they call the EMS, and everybody kind of goes in together.
Oh, that's really nice.
So it's nice that we can get
They don't just leave
from
them.
the friends. They don't just leave them. No, there's the sense of responsibility, and and you don't have the.
I mean,
United
it's a
States,
silver lining.
Yeah.
That's a silver lining.
In the US,
surprise to
you
me.
kind of dump them outside the ER and just kind of speed off.
Yeah,
But
exactly. That's
no,
why,
no,
like, wow, they're actually
no, they brought in
the
by their
achrayut,
friends.
the sort of responsibility, the collective responsibility for their friend.
Yeah.
I know I did ask earlier gender differences. Do you see?
We see many more. I think anecdotally, I don't have data on this, but we do see many more girls than boys.
It's just the amount of alcohol
girls
needed to
reach
overtake
that point much more quickly than boys.
Uh-huh.
Because their livers aren't as equipped to metabolize alcohol as
that have to do with their size.
Has to do with their size, and there's just a gender difference in how alcohol is metabolized. Has to do with the fat percentage of the body, which is higher in girls than in boys, but it has to do with how able they are to metabolize the alcohol. You know, to take the alcohol and dehydrogenate it in the liver in order to inactivate it. Otherwise, it's floating around your body and being absorbed into your brain cells, where it kind of gums up the works.
So you, at least in your experience, anecdotally, you see more female teenagers?
Yes, we see more female teenagers.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. Bit of a surprise. Does that also track for Purim? Or that's a little bit more balanced?
I don't know. Yeah. And the Purim issue, I think, is, if I was working in Jerusalem, I would see it more in the yeshiva population, guys who go out, yeshiva boys go out to the bars, which... and there are bars in Jerusalem that cater to them. I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna throw out names there, but you know who you
they
are.
could be potential sponsors. You never know.
I would not take their money.
Okay.
No, their money is cursed.
Okay.
But there
I
are
am open to
bars.
sponsorships. I don't have any, but I'm open to them.
There are bars in Jerusalem that cater to these 18-year-olds that are waiting for them and eagerly feed them alcohol in order to get them hooked and coming back week after week. And I know that these are institutions that will serve minors alcohol with no questions asked. You do not need to be 18 to walk in there. Wow. They cater in English, and they cater to the American crowd that suddenly finds they're basically, it's kind
they
of
have
like
the ability. They have the freedom, the access to do so.
Yeah, it's like the opium wars in China in the late 1800s. The British feeding the Chinese opium in order to break open the trade barriers.
Yeah.
You know, they're in the same way that these bars are. Since the time I was a yeshiva student, this is going back decades, year after year, with no consequences at all. They are serving 18 and below alcohol with no, usually a responsible bartender would say, you've had too much. There's none of that there. They intend to get these kids drunk. And parents should know that. Parents should be, a parent of a child who's 18 and in yeshiva in Israel should be forbidding their child from setting foot in any of these facilities.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. I'm not going to give names, but you know who you are.
Yeah. I am, based on this conversation, I'm really curious what the sort of punishment mechanisms are for governmental agencies against bars, retail locations, restaurants who serve underage. Because like in America, it's taken so very seriously, but there's probably such a negative response that, they're incentivized to stay in line. It sounds like in Israel, even though there's something on the books, how is it actually regulated?
The big businesses, the big supermarkets are probably not the ones you'd have to be concerned about. It's the little kiosks. That
was the one in, October 2001, where I bought whatever it was, and this little kid got vodka.
Yeah,
probably exactly. 14 or 15.
Exactly. They walk up, they're saying it's for my brother, it's for my father. Yeah, sure. Yeah. And so I'm sure that on the books there are penalties. I don't know what the enforcement is like. I don't know if the state has the ability to make this a priority and to clamp down on all of these little kiosks that are selling alcohol to kids.
That's a totally separate conversation. It sounds like, but certainly for but for the hospitalizations, what you've seen. Well, not necessarily hospitalizations, but the kids the adolescents who are coming in.
Yeah, I think that the surveys I've seen have shown that the percentages of adolescents who have access to alcohol is higher in Israel than in the U.S. And I think part of that is the age of legal drinking. And the argument is that, well, you can serve in the Army at 18, why can't you go out and buy beer? But the Army will not allow you to have alcohol in uniform, and for a good reason. Yeah. So, I don't know why the state would allow until you're out of uniform. It should be illegal.
Hey there, I wanted to break in yet again. Although I asked for support in financial ways because it does cost some money to make the hosting happen and other aspects of Jewish drinking happen. So your financial support is definitely appreciated. And don't forget, you can go to jewishdrinking.com/donate. But also, another way of supporting the show and everything that Jewish Drinking does is also to tell your friends, tell your neighbors. If you like this content, if you like this show, maybe people also like it. So feel free to let them know, hey, I have this interesting episode I heard, or a few episodes, or whatever it is, or even a few clips. Feel free to share with your friends. All right, thank you so much. Now back into the show.
Alcohol-free is not necessarily alcohol-free. In the United States, if a drink has less than, I think it's 0.5%, it is alcohol-free. But it does have alcohol. And so if someone has a genetic predisposition to alcoholism, that little amount of alcohol can induce a crave.
Really?
And so,
So like a
alcohol
kombucha.
free. There's actually just a study on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So kombucha is not alcohol free, even
Right.
though it advertises itself. Interestingly, in Norway, you can have up to 2.8% and claim that you are alcohol free.
Oh wow.
So the percent changes by country.
Culture, imagine.
So
Because cultures differ, like their relationship to
Mhm.
drinking depends by culture.
So alcohol-free beer tastes a little bit like beer and has been promoted. I mean, you see it in the supermarkets. There's just racks and racks of it. It's been promoted
it's
as an alternative,
exploded in recent years.
right? As an alternative
Yeah.
to alcoholic drinking, but it's not actually alcohol-free. It's got a little bit of alcohol in it, and so people who are really looking for alcohol-free should know that.
Oh,
It has been advertised as a way to treat alcoholism.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But the study showed that in a very small percentage, very small being like 5 to 10%, it actually worsens their drinking because it induces a craving, and then they go back to alcohol.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's not a cure-all.
Is that part of a conversation in Israel at all, or just?
No, it hasn't. I mean, the price of beer has come down, but I haven't seen alcohol-free beer as a market segment.
Yeah, I can't imagine Israelis buying it.
Right.
I still struggle with seeing Americans buying it, but definitely I don't see that in Israel.
I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
No. I mean, they have malt drinks, which I guess are the closest alcohol-free substitutes, but there isn't this alcohol-free rack that you see like you would when you walk into a Kroger's or a Wegmans.
Dr. Scheier, this has been incredibly fascinating, insightful, but before we go, is there anything you would like to promote?
The Kaplan Pediatric Emergency Department.
Okay, all right.
Best in the country.
There we go. In Rehovot.
In Rehovot.
All right.
Yes.
Sounds great. Well, Dr. Shire, thank you so much, and l'chaim.
L'chaim. Thank you.